Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this MED virtual panel. I am Aldo Liga, I am Research Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Center at ISPI. As you know, this event is organized under the framework of the Rome Med Dialogues, the annual initiative on the wider Mediterranean region, co-promoted by ISPI, an Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. This is the second event of a cycle we have had the honor to organize in cooperation with the Middle East Institute. And today we will talk about the evolution of Gulf countries' influence in the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa is one of the most unstable regions in the world. This is a relevant topic per se, but it is even more important if we put it in connection with the ongoing crisis in the Red Sea. Over the past 15 years, Gulf countries have enhanced political, security, and economic ties across the Red Sea. In recent years, we have seen the reinforcement of political and security cooperation, the development of partnerships that are at both bilateral and multilateral level, the organization of specific summits, peacemaking efforts, and sustained humanitarian assistance. But we have also seen a certain involvement from the Gulf into local conflicts and expanding military ties. There is also a growing economic penetration from the Gulf. Gulf states are securing an access to African economies and markets. This is crucial for them. There are huge investments flowing to the region and a growing presence in a lot of different sectors, in particular in the field of logistics, energy, maritime services, and port infrastructure. It is important to underline that in all these political and economic dimensions, we can see the, let's say, transposition of dynamics of competition and rivalry among Gulf countries. The Horn of Africa, indeed, has emerged as a focal point where these nations project their influence, assert their strength, show their regional ambition, and leverage their relationships. So today we will try to untangle these very complex dynamics and the diverse approaches of Gulf monarchies. And we have the pleasure to discuss all these complex dynamics with three distinguished speakers. Let me introduce them. Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Sager, who is the founder and chairman of the Gulf Research Center. Anna Jacobs, senior analyst at the International Crisis Group and non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. And finally, Miret Mabrouk, who is senior fellow and director of the Egypt and Horn of Africa program at the Middle East Institute. Thanks for being with us today. Let's immediately open our discussion. We will have around 45 minutes. I will start with three questions for each speaker. In a first phase, we will try to understand the nature and evolution of the engagement of Gulf countries in the Horn. And then we will try to understand how actually these countries are directly or indirectly involved into some specific conflicts and crises that are ongoing in the area. A remark to the audience: if you have questions at the end of the panel, we will have a brief Q&A session. If you have any questions, in our YouTube channel there is a live chat, so please type them your questions. So let's begin immediately setting the scene of Gulf East Africa relations. I would start with a question for Dr. Al-Sager. Over the last decades, Gulf countries have stepped up their role in the international scene and improved their global influence. So what role do relations with countries in the Horn of Africa play in the consolidation of this increasing global assertiveness?
Well, first, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It depends wherever you are for your audience. But it's a pleasure to be with the other colleagues in this webinar. Let me start by saying the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea for a country like Saudi Arabia is extremely vital. And there is no compromises in the mind of Saudi about the security and the importance of the security and stability of the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea. As we all know, there is more than 11 military bases in Djibouti, but also there is another 8 Navy and military bases in the Red Sea. However, what triggered the issue in the Horn of Africa originally was the viruses issue, and it has been a great effort from many countries, including the Gulf countries, in joining forces to fight viruses on the Bab el-Mandeb and the Arabian Sea also there. What we have witnessed in the last couple of years, of course, is the Houthi in Yemen, the violent non-state actors, act on the attacking and disturbing the Red Sea security and the Horn of Africa, and also the Bab el-Mandeb, which is we all know how important it is, how vital it is for the international economics and businesses. But also it started by having all the supply coming from Israel, sorry, from Iran, all the way to Yemen to the Houthi. They have been able to store a lot of their capacity. In the last couple of years, we have seen the Israeli and the Iranian disturbing and having a separate and tension on the maritime issue in the Red Sea and in the Arabian Sea. However, after the 7th of October, Iran found it extremely lucrative for them to discuss and to deal with the Houthi by endorsing some of their activity on the notion of supporting the Palestinian freedom and standing with the Palestinian on the Gaza issue. I think the Gulf countries have also sent many years ago, in 2018, they were almost ready to get over or to take over Hodeidah. At that time, it was fully stopped by international power like Britain and the US, saying, no, we should not do it. If you do it, we will go to the Security Council resolution. They were threatened by that, and nobody wanted to listen about the serious threat that a group like this and a violent state actors, when they take over the power in their hand, and when they have a weapon supply from a regional power country like Iran without any supervision or control. However, what happened now on the Red Sea, we start seeing the three levels. The deterrent, after all the issues today, the Red Sea is quite full of naval capability. But the big question is, did that naval capability present a deterrent to the those whom they're acting negatively on the Red Sea, like the Houthi and what they are attacking and doing, or did the defensive system that they have used have delivered the job by stopping them from that, or even the offensive attack that they have done, did that brought the solution to that? Unfortunately, the countries of the Red Sea, first, we still have a major crisis in the Red Sea, whether in Somalia or in Sudan, Yemen, Sudan, mega country have a major problem in that one. They don't have a good capable naval or even coastal capability to be used, from their side. So by having all this international naval capability, including the European, the Chinese, the American, the British, everybody, did that really stop the the Houthi, or did that really create a better stability on the Red Sea? Unfortunately, it did not. So the big question is the presence of all these forces create more stability or less stability? As long as there is no framework agreement between the regional country on the Horn of Africa, Red Sea, and also the international power to decide on a naval security structure that can be used by both and can really fight all sorts of aggression that taking place, and can ensure the freedom of movement and the freedom of the sea, the stability and the security also, that will be difficult. Yes, the US have encouraged to create a coalition prosperity one, but some of the country from the region, with the exception of Bahrain, because of the need of supplying of a logistical issue, UAE and Saudi Arabia did not join, and they did not join for the obvious reason. One is they think there should have been a Security Council resolution, to define the creation of such a forces. There is the law of sea 1981, and that should have been respected, and the emphasis should have been on that one. Third, they have been doing a lot of mediation between the Houthi and the legitimate government in Yemen, so they did not want to jeopardize that sort of mediation and political efforts. And fourth, they believe they don't need the international forces that exist today, including the US. They don't need the naval capability of Saudi or UAE because they don't have much, and they are not able.
Have a small technical problem. So I have now a question for Anna Jacobs. Going a little bit more into the details of Gulf relations with East African countries over the past decade, what have been the main reasons and the drivers behind this engagement? And what are the specific interests and agenda of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates in the region?
First of all, thank you so much for having me as well. It's wonderful to be on such an excellent panel. I think it's really crucial to start by saying that, the Horn has become a space of competition for rising activist middle powers, but this isn't entirely new. The Horn has always been a space for geopolitical and Middle East regional competition, especially, I would say, throughout the Cold War. So I find that it's really helpful to kind of initiate this conversation with that. And then to get into, again, kind of the main reasons behind the, I think, growing engagement from GCC countries, and especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar over the years. I would divide them into, economic, political, ideological, and security oriented. I would say on the economic front, Gulf states are increasingly focused on economic diversification and regional economic connectivity between Africa, Central Asia, and Eastern Asia. Investment in African countries is a key part of this push for greater regional economic connectivity for GCC countries. African markets offer a lot in terms of trade, natural resources, consumer bases, and of course, agriculture as well. I would say on the political front, and especially during the kind of height of sort of intra-GCC tensions during the blockade of Qatar from 2017 to very early 2021, Gulf rivals were vying for political influence in the Horn and trying to cultivate their own alliances. So I think during the blockade, especially, this political competition was very zero sum. But I do think that this zero sum competition has lessened significantly in the 2 years or so since the end of the blockade and the sort of start of the intra-GCC reconciliation process. On the ideological front, even with changing regional dynamics, curbing Iranian influence and monitoring, I think, and curbing any sort of rise of, Islamist or Muslim Brotherhood associated groups, I think, these were considerable driving factors in their interest in the Horn. And again, especially, I would say, post 2011 and during the 2017 to 2021 blockade. I do think it has become somewhat of a less factor, of course, as Gulf countries, and especially Saudi and Iran, have developed a better relationship. They obviously resumed ties last year. And then, of course, I think the sort of perceived threat of Islamist political parties has also lessened quite a lot. So while I do think that curbing Iranian influence and, concern about Islamist associated groups, still remain important, I think I think that both of them are, less significant than they once were. And then finally, on the security front, of course, as conflicts intensify in the Horn, Gulf countries, I think, are very much focused on conflict resolution, on trying to, contain this, obviously through mediation, foreign aid, and obviously significant investment, but also in some cases through greater military cooperation and counterterrorism support. The Red Sea security is crucial for the GCC countries. It is an incredibly geostrategic waterway which connects with the Suez Canal, the Gulf of Aden. So I think that all of these are key factors that help explain their growing interest and presence in the Horn. In terms, I think, of your second question, if I have enough time, I think it's very interesting to look at kind of the similarities and differences in the approaches taken by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. Obviously, I think these three countries in many ways use very similar tools to protect their interests there, and also to, of course, assure their political and economic interests. So, of course, foreign aid is huge. Investment, development, and humanitarian aid, as I mentioned previously, mediation and conflict resolution are absolutely key. And again, in certain cases as well, military cooperation is definitely used. And then, of course, though, there are key differences. So, for example, the UAE has a specific focus on, investing in critical infrastructure. So investments in ports are, a major part of their sort of broader economic strategy for, I think, all of Africa, but especially in the Horn. And then, of course, for a country like Saudi, religious soft power is something that is very much used. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia has the longest coastline along the Red Sea and has set up the Red Sea Council, I think, back in 2020. So Saudi Arabia, has other sort of means of asserting its influence as well. Of course, for Saudi, many of their, flagship Saudi Vision 2030 projects, like NEOM, are along the Red Sea. So that plays a major role. And then I would say, lastly, too, from what I know, I think Saudi Arabia has a specific concern, too, about curbing immigration from the Horn of Africa via Yemen. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this very comprehensive portrait of the relations between the Horn and Gulf countries. Miretta, question for you, just to go a little bit deeper on our understanding of the economic relations between these two, let's say, blocks. Why is East Africa so strategically important for Gulf countries, and how have economic relations evolved over the past decades?
So, good morning from where I am. Good afternoon to everyone else. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be able to do this in cooperation with ISPI. The Gulf, I mean, relations between the Gulf and the Horn of Africa are not new. They're old, they are traditional, and it's only in the West, if you like, that people are, paying what I believe is the appropriate amount of attention to the Horn. I mean, the US only recently appointed a special CEO for the Horn, for example, a few years ago. That's not the case in the Gulf, where the Gulf has always been acutely aware that the safety and security of the Horn is intrinsically important to the safety and security of the Gulf. And that's for several reasons, most of which have been outlined by my fellow panelists most ably. And so I'll maybe just stick to a few specific things. On the economics, you're talking about a lot of money here, outsized for the size of the countries involved, in the sense that just before the year 2000, if you like, we'd had about a decade where Gulf investment had slacked off slightly and then became significantly more important. And in the first 17 years of this century, between 2000 and 2017, the Gulf countries invested over 13 billion in the Horn. That's an enormous amount of money. All right, and currently, at the moment, the Gulf are the largest investors after China, the EU, and the US. With, in order of the size of investments, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. Okay. As has been pointed out, these reasons are both economic and political. But the thing is, the economics and the political are intrinsically intertwined. All right. For a start, the Horn represents to the Gulf a massively important load in shipping and logistics. And then, of course, there is food security. Gulf nations don't have their own food, and regardless of whatever their admirable efforts to grow their own food, food security is intrinsically linked in the Gulf. Okay, and if you look, for example, also linked to shipping, because if you look, for example, when we discussed battleground, we've been talking a lot about the Red Sea and insecurity in the Red Sea, and continuously we mention Egypt and we mention Yemen, but we don't often talk about Djibouti, which is tiny, but is also near Bab el-Mandeb and is vital to agricultural movement. Now, for a country like Saudi Arabia, for example, that has over 2 million hectares cultivated in African countries, you can see the importance. And this is the same for all Gulf countries. Africa has, that part of Africa has enormous potential in terms of livestock and agricultural wealth. Most of their agricultural wealth is only 44% of it is currently being used. So you can understand the attraction. Now, there is something, however, very often that investment has been linked to oil wealth, which means essentially when the price is the higher the price of the petrol, the more investment you're going to have, which can lead to a sort of go stop effort in funding, which is not conducive to long-term development. You want to bear in mind, of course, that the nations of the Horn of Africa, that they're They're not passive on this. They continuously and actively court Gulf investment. And you can see it from, they will continuously reach out. And what you're looking at is a complicated and quite delicate web of political relationships. Okay. Now, Anna mentioned that relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran have improved. They certainly have improved, but as everyone knows, the Gulf states worry incessantly about Iran, probably with good reason. The other thing is, of course, the Gulf, the Horn is, as we pointed out, not a market that is as well known to, let's say, China, the EU, and Europe as it is to the Gulf. And investors are very, very often very careful about investing in places they don't know, which has given the Gulf an enormous advantage, the long-standing relationships and the need to involve themselves, whether for security or, let's not forget religion, because very often this investment is linked to proselytizing. And that, by the way, is a concern that many countries in the Horn of Africa have, because they're already fighting extremist forces. So it can be very, very. It's a sensitive subject. And again, the extent of the political involvement can be seen because there is not that much capital in the Gulf that is genuinely private. All right. The governments very often, have a significant role in directing investment. Obviously, people are still trying to do business, but it is impossible to separate, what the state wants from what is being invested. All right. So there are state-owned holding companies, there are central banks, there are ministries of finance, there are multilateral and bilateral developments and charities, and these are all involved in the funding. Now, I don't want to go on. We can probably continue, but I'm going to stop here just because I can see it's running out of time, so I'm going to stop here.
Thank you very much, Miret. So let's explore now the many connections between Gulf states' national interests and the many crises and conflicts that are ongoing in the Horn of Africa. So I will start with Dr. Al-Sager. We have seen a lot of interesting developments in Somalia recently. In January, Ethiopia and Somaliland saw a region, a country which is part of the Federal Republic of Somalia, which proclaimed independence over 30 years ago. Somaliland signed a memorandum of understanding with Ethiopia. The content of this memorandum is unclear, but it includes the leasing of land of Somaliland to Ethiopia in exchange of the recognition of its statehood. This is creating tensions between Mogadishu and Addis Ababa. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have backed Mogadishu. The United Arab Emirates did it too. But Abu Dhabi is in a difficult position given its strong relations with both Somaliland and Ethiopian authorities. So my question for Dr. Al-Sager is, what are the main stakes of the recent Ethiopia-Somaliland deal for the Red Sea region? And what is the Saudi perspective of these new sources of tensions? Please, if for this second round of questions, if you could limit your answers to around 3 minutes. In this way, we will have the time also for the Q&A session. Thank you. Maybe we cannot hear you, Dr. Al-Sager. So maybe I will come back to you in a moment. So moving from Somalia to Sudan, where almost 1 year after the outbreak of the conflict, of the civil war, the situation is still dangerous, and we are seeing there similar dynamics to what we experienced in Somalia. This is a question for Anna Jacobs. How is competition between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi evolving in Sudan, and what are the differences and different motivations behind these competing approaches?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think on this question, I'd like to look at sort of the conflict resolution efforts over the last year, sort of since the war broke out. So obviously, the U.S. and Saudi have been leading in terms of mediation by hosting the Jeddah talks. Several rounds have been hosted. But I think, unfortunately, not a whole lot has necessarily come out of those talks yet. But I think what is interesting is that there are also several other tracks, I think, that are in place that have taken place. So, for example, in Manama, there was, I think, another round as well, but this Manama track, from what I know, was sort of initiated by the UAE and Egypt. Again, and those two countries, who are, I think, very influential in the war, are not involved in the Jeddah talks in any way as of now. So this Manama track allegedly was very senior level, and I think went relatively well and was kept, I think, very private for a while. And again, I think it's important to note that this was sort of a separate effort that was made. So I think what this says is that there are different approaches, I think, between Saudi Arabia and the UAE right now. But I think that there is an attempt to sort of move beyond that. So it's not sure yet, but my sense is that also Riyadh, I think, is more open to including other countries in the Jeddah talks now, such as the UAE and Egypt. And I think that that will allow for perhaps a more constructive round of talks, because, of course, the UAE plays a major role here. They have a very close relationship with the RSF. Egypt also is very crucial here and has a very strong relationship with the army. So the idea, I think, is to bring more regional players to the table to try and, again, assert more leverage. So I do think that there were different approaches, but I think that the hope is that these will sort of start to coalesce. So thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Miret, another long-standing issue in the region is the dispute around the building and the entry into operation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Egypt has recently suspended negotiations with Ethiopia aimed at reaching a legally binding agreement on the filling of the dam. So in your opinion, what influence have Gulf countries exerted so far on the Egypt-Ethiopia dispute, and what role could they play potentially in facilitating a political solution to the crisis?
Okay, so this dispute or discussions, or however you want to place it, is not just between Egypt and Ethiopia. It is Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. For some reason, people often discount Sudan, although it is quite literally in the middle. To cut an extremely long story short, because this has been going on for 12 years now. Sudan has built the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's almost finished. It's gone through its filling. It should be going to operation soon. We don't know when because they haven't said. But it's been a done deal for the last maybe 6 years. So that's not an issue. What is an issue is that this is the largest hydroelectric dam of its kind in the world, and it is the only dam of its kind in the world to have been built without an ESIA. An ESIA is an environmental and sustainability impact assessment, which is what tells you what effect a dam is going to have on the downstream countries. The only downstream countries are Sudan and then Egypt. Egypt is the most downstream country. Egypt gets over 95% of its water from the Nile, right? 95%. And this is water for everything, not for factories or golf courses. This is water for everything, all right? Now, there have been many studies, but generally speaking, the most reputable ones say that under normal circumstances, Sudan and Egypt, particularly Egypt, because you want to remember that Sudan's concerns overlap with Egypt, but they're not quite the same. Sudan is more worried about security because the dam is right across its border and affects its own dams. But Sudan is only 50% desert and Egypt is 97% desert. So you can see the issue. Under normal circumstances, water supply to Sudan and Egypt probably should not be affected. The issue comes if there is a drought. If there is a drought, then all bets are off because it's a hydroelectric dam. The Ethiopians will need the water to turn the turbines. And then the question is, how much water do they release downstream? So what Egypt and Sudan have been asking for the last dozen years, up until they suspended talks on March the 3rd, or at least they announced that they had suspended talks on March the 3rd. What they both wanted was one, a legally binding agreement, on filling and operation of the dam, which would, denote how much water would be released in case of a drought, and two, international arbitration. All right, so that if anything goes wrong, you can go to arbitration, both of which Ethiopia has consistently denied. Ethiopia has said that it will run it in good faith and, will be careful of its neighbors. And the problem is Sudan and Egypt are worried because Ethiopia has a history of not watching out for its neighbors with its dams. In Kenya, the Great Turkana Lake has been unalterably affected. In Sudan, the Jubbon Chebeli rivers, which are the only sources of irrigation for the Somali lowlands, are expected to dry out over the next few years. It's been disastrous, so no wonder that. So that's been the discussion over the last 12 years, all right? Now, other people have tried to intercede, most notably the US, under the Trump administration, and the negotiations ground to a halt just before there was a signature. The Ethiopians pulled out. Now, the problem is you have two issues in this kind of discussion. One, Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia are all very important countries to particular people, all right? So nobody wanted to wade into this fray. Two, water is a sensitive subject. Now, Egypt and Sudan did manage to get this taken up at the Security Council, but the Security Council doesn't really want to discuss water because there are, transboundary water abusers on the Security Council, and nobody wants to open up that particular can of worms. So this is where the Gulf comes in. The only thing that is going to make any sort of headway, in my opinion, which is something I've been saying for years, and hopefully it'll come about. The only thing is that you have to put something on the table that makes it interesting or worthwhile for Ethiopia to rethink its course of action, because Ethiopia has been very, very clear that it needs this dam for its development. And you want to bear in mind that great swathes of Ethiopia have no electricity, and the dam, which was, the actual construction of the dam was financed by Ethiopia itself and is a matter of enormous national pride, quite rightly. Okay, so the only thing that is going to get them to rethink is involvement and probably a financial solution by the Gulf. And actually, the UAE has attempted to come in and put down a solution, if you like, that involves joint investment, joint Emirati investment, okay, to Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia that interlinks all of their fortunes together so that any one pulling out would harm the third one. That was on the table and has been going back and forth. But it is really the only situation in which I believe this issue, which is an issue that can have disastrous consequences for the region, can be solved.
Thank you very much, Miret. Now I tried again to ask my question on Somalia to Dr. Al-Sager. I hope. Yeah, okay, that's perfect. Please.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, I think the Saudi and the rest of the Gulf country position was very clear in support of the Arab League position. And although we understand the historical link between Ethiopia and Berbera in the old days, and we understand the investment on the Berbera harbor, but that, of course, did irritate Djibouti and also the Somaliland, the Mogadishu government there. I think what we need to find out now, since the three issues, I mean, when I look at, there was some Security Council resolution, almost 3 resolutions related to the Horn of Africa and the viruses, 2 Security Council related to the Red Sea. So Security Council, the UN did not do much. The regional power is not sufficient to provide the regional security and to be in the way that we all expected and wanted, and we should be. Neither the international, European, and American presence also did achieve the target that they want to have. The problem that we still see that today, maybe with all the international presence, that could be an area of conflict, could be a platform of a future conflict. If we have the Chinese, the American, everybody. But at the same time, I think there is an international consensus when it comes to the security of the Red Sea and the Horn and also the Gulf of Aden. So what we need to do maybe is we need to deal with the political differences, political issues on those countries, and try to bring stability, because that will have a mega impact. When we had a fragmented Somal, we had the viruses issue. Now we have a violent state actor in Yemen that, this is leading to a major conflict on the Red Sea. When we have the external regional power intervention like Iran, that also has this sort of disturbance. So probably the way out, what we need to do is first to have the adequate power to bring stability and security in the short term, but in the long term is to have a regional and international cooperation, coordination on a security architecture for the Horn, the Red Sea, to try to bring stability. Of course, we understand the problem between Egypt and Ethiopia and the water issue, and this is an extremely sensitive also in Sudan. But again, nobody will accept aggression or an expansion like what Ethiopia, did, which was not recognized by Somaliland, is not recognized by anybody, with the exception that they do have some commercial offices somewhere in support of their business and importer requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Sager. So we will run out of time, but we'll try to mix some questions I have already prepared with some inputs from the audience. So a question for Dr. Al-Sager. We see competition between, for example, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in some contests in the area. Can can Gulf countries turn their competing ambitions in the region into opportunities for political cooperation? So is there room for improved political cooperation among Gulf countries in the region? 1 minute, if it is possible, for your answer.
Definitely there is a great room for cooperation, and we start seeing that, and I don't think we are going to enter into any conflict between the Gulf country when it comes to the Horn of Africa and the security stability there. In fact, we can see more collaboration. Today, UAE is involved also in the case of Sudan in trying to resolve and to contribute from their side also. So I look at it positive. I look at it that there will be more coordination, collaboration, because it's in the interest of every party.
Thank you. A question for Anna from the audience. Last year, Saudi Arabia and Iran signed an agreement and started a reconciliation. Has this agreement had an impact on Iranian foreign policy towards East Africa?
Well, I am definitely not following as closely Iranian foreign policy in Eastern Africa. But I think what I can say is kind of just underline what I had mentioned earlier, which is that even with the sort of improvement of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, curbing Iranian influence in Eastern Africa, I do think is still very much a concern for Saudi Arabia and for other GCC countries as well. So even with this agreement signed between Saudi and Iran last year, I still think that this is a major concern for the GCC. Thanks.
Thank you. And a final question for Miret. We have already mentioned this problem at the beginning of the of this panel on the current crisis in the Red Sea. So Houthi strikes against military and commercial vessels in the Red Sea, US, UK, and European Union naval missions to deter these attacks. How the current security crisis, what role can this security crisis play in Gulf engagement in the Horn of Africa?
Okay, so as briefly as possible, the only way out of the current situation is going to be a political one. There is no war. I mean, the Houthis, you're not fighting an army, if you like. So the current aggressions could go on forever. And of course, Arab countries are extremely reluctant to involve themselves in that fight because you don't want to be seen as an aggressor. So the only way out is going to be a political one. I would hesitate to say, support the Yemeni forces against the Houthis because I'm not sure that that's the way to go. But I do think that I think negotiations with the Houthis are going to be the only way to go. And I also, I am not an Iran expert, but my understanding is honestly the Iranian grip on the reins of the Houthis is not as firm as most people think it is. I think that the Houthis, view the Iranians more as partners than bosses. So I honestly think that the only way to go is negotiation with the Houthis.
Thank you very much, Miret. So before concluding, first of all, sorry for the technical inconveniences we had during this panel. Then I would like to suggest for everyone who is interested in Gulf politics, yesterday we published a very interesting report on the security side of Gulf visions, adapting defense to the connectivity age, edited by our senior associate research fellow, Eleonora Devani. The report is available on our website. So a big thank to all the guests, to Abdulaziz Al-Sager, to Anna Jacobs and Miret Mabrouk for having shared with us their insight on Gulf Horn of Africa relation. Thanks again to the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. for their cooperation. And thanks to the audience. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.